Meantime, President Trump announcing a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, but Israel accusing Iran, and not just accusing it, but looks like it already has happened now, of now violating it already. Israel's defense minister saying he ordered his country's military to respond forcefully. Join us right now, Palantir Technologies head of defense, Mike Gallagher, former congressman of Wisconsin. Good morning to you. I think we're all trying to understand whether we really have a ceasefire in place. I think it's already been broken. It's pretty clear. The question is, how do you enforce such a thing without all sorts of new retaliatory efforts?
Well, I think there's only one mechanism for enforcing a ceasefire, and that's joint American-Israeli hard power. And we are still awaiting, of course, the full battle damage assessment of the initial strike. But I think it's increasingly obvious that this was a good day for deterrence, not only in the Middle East, but around the world. Operation Midnight Hammer was an incredibly complex operation. We're talking 7 B-2 stealth bombers on a 36-hour bombing strike, over 125 aircraft, 4th and 5th gen fighters, guided missile submarines. There's no other country in the world that can do something like this. And so enforcing a ceasefire is going to require a greater investment of American power, but the effectiveness of this operation, as well as the associated decoy and deception effort with part of the strike package flying west over the Pacific, President Trump himself announcing a 2-week timeline for a decision, the White House maintaining operational security. I think this, on balance, has produced at least a semblance of stability and a chance for peace. Obviously, the longer-term road to stability in a region that has defied our efforts to impose stability on it is building off the fundamental framework of the Abraham Accords, that historic rapprochement between Israel and the Sunni Arab Gulf states.
Mike, is your expectation ultimately that they're going to either be need to be boots on the ground, some kind of covert Mossad-like effort or something inside Iran to be able to fully grasp and find out exactly how successful this effort over the weekend really was? And what does that look like to you?
Well, I believe after Israel initiated their campaign, incredibly effective and daring campaign against Iran's nuclear complex, they published videos of Mossad's efforts in the country. I think for an American perspective, there need not be American boots on the ground. We have an extensive military presence throughout the region, but this demonstrates the importance, how essential it is to have lethal allies on the ground like Israel, allies that are capable of defending themselves, but also willing to share the burden of shaping the regional security order. This is a massive advantage we have relative to other powers like Russia and China. Iran has no true allies. Their patrons like China view Iran solely as a source of hydrocarbons or as a mechanism for messing with the United States. In fact, I would go so far as to say China doesn't want allies. They just want vassals. So to the extent we need to project power into Iran itself, we can use our long-range precision strike complex, which is we've just shown to be incredibly effective, as well as the lethal allies we have on the ground like Israel.
But how much of this can ultimately be done by drones, for example, or other kinds of devices without actually putting boots on the ground, whether they be American, Israeli, or otherwise?
Well, I think a lot can be done to damage Iran's nuclear program, to deter Iran, to take out key military leaders. In fact, I would argue that in the first Trump administration, are taking Qasem Soleimani off the battlefield, despite all the concerns about it igniting a larger regional war, about it necessitating a greater involvement, necessitating boots on the ground. In fact, the exact opposite happened. And we're actually sort of seeing a similar script play out where the Iranians, at least initially, I don't want to minimize the risk of a retaliatory attack. I don't want to minimize the risk of a terrorist attack. I concede the point that our bases remain incredibly vulnerable to drone attacks, to low-end missile attacks. However, the initial response, missile strikes against our military base in Qatar, seems carefully and deliberately calibrated to avoid killing Americans, a pure face-saving measure for the regime. And also the Quds Force, which is Iran's primary terrorist sponsoring action arm, has really never been the same since we killed Qasem Soleimani. And so, again, early going here, we need to figure out exactly what the state of Iran's nuclear program is. We have to be fully on guard for what Iran's nature of retaliation is. But I don't think we are going to be inexorably or inevitably drawn into a protracted ground conflict in the region.
Hey, Mike, do you think we have achieved the objective just in terms of shutting this program down? And if so, for how long?
Well, the early reports indicate we've set back the program significantly. I believe the head of the IEA just came out and said there's been significant damage. We don't know if that's a matter of years, months, or permanently. I know Israel's strategic advisor, Ron Dermer, has said we may have permanently shut down the program. Obviously, there's always the risk of reconstituting the program. It's very hard because beyond the physical damage, think about the mental damage we've done with Israel taking out, or allegedly Israel taking out, I think, 8 of the 13 top Iranian scientists. It's not easy to acquire or rebuild that level of expertise. And notably, though Russia and China have condemned the strike, neither right now is really rushing to Iran's aid. This may show, in fact, how fragile this anti-American axis of Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing really is. We may have just actually shattered this axis, not just the nuclear program.
Mike, that's where I wanted to actually go with this conversation next. We have spent most of the time that we often talk with you actually not usually talking about Iran, but usually talking about China. And to the extent that we talked probably 2 years ago about the idea that the Ukraine-Russia war, some people call that a dress rehearsal for what could happen in Taiwan and how the U.S. would react. My question to you is, do you think that President Xi watches what happened over the last 72 hours, the last week or two now, and says to himself, okay, actually, you know what, I am not taking Taiwan in the next several years because I've now watched the U.S. Step up in a major way? Or do you say that President Xi looks at President Trump and says he's got all sorts of things going on in the Middle East now, and maybe he wouldn't step in given the sort of fissure we're seeing inside MAGA and other things where there are a lot of people critiquing the president about involving himself in things like this?
Well, with the obvious caveat that I do not know what lurks in the black heart of Xi Jinping, nor what he thinks about on a daily basis, I do think it's the former, not the latter. And I would base that assessment on what happened in the first Trump administration when Trump and Xi were having dinner. Trump ordered a strike in the Middle East. And at the time, I argued that enhanced deterrence globally. And I see a similar dynamic playing out here. There's no doubt, however, that the Chinese are going to school on the nature of the operation we've just conducted. Again, a complex operation from space down to the depths of the ocean, trying to understand our capabilities, our weaknesses. And there's also no doubt that we need to develop a better ability to replenish our stockpiles of critical munitions, as well as our high-end platforms, right? We need to recapitalize our long-range bomber fleet. We don't have enough of those. We are depleting very costly long-range precision fires in the Middle East. So if we want to take advantage of this momentary enhancement of deterrence, it's going to require us to rebuild our entire defense industrial base. But I do think this has had a positive effect on deterrence in Indo-PACOM. It's also imperative, however, that we highlight China's continuing or past support for Iran. Iran, for example, acquired thousands of tons of ammonium perchlorate from a Chinese firm. That's enough to produce fuel for roughly 800 ballistic missiles. Reportedly, PLA satellites are supplying imagery to the Houthis. So we need to tease out the connection between Iran and China to enhance deterrence as well.